Tim Gray, and the owner of Comics for Collectors in downtown Ithaca that's located on North Aurora Street. This is the Comic Book Club of Ithaca, and they're a not-for-profit organization, and they've been going since 1974. When we first started it, we were happy having a place for people that could meet and talk about comics, and presentations would be given, and possibility of trading and selling and buying comics. And that function of it kind of disappeared in the early years to end up having just a couple meetings a month where people would get together and talk about comics and their favorite series. And it's kind of melded into other aspects of fantasy like science fiction and things. But later on, a lot of our goals was to put on these conventions and invite big name creators. And in the early days, we did have a lot of big names. Nowadays, we usually just have people that are from the local areas.
It's the smallest show I've ever been to, but it's got more people here that are just that are enthused about comics, great creators that you can network with and just talk to. I mean, you could talk to editors and writers and painters and cartoonists and like people that are big name people that have worked on Spider-Man and Superman and Batman and Venture Brothers and Iron Man, and just you've got these people and they're at your disposal in this small little show, which is the biggest little show in the world. I love it. I always liked to draw, and I never really thought I would ever do it professionally. It was always like a dream, but I also wanted to be an astronaut and a cowboy, so there you go. Well, I got a job, my first job, working a freelance job for Bongo Comics, and I actually inked a Simpsons book, and that was like, wow, I can buy this at the grocery store, It's like I actually went into Wegmans grocery store and saw it on the rack and took a picture of it with my cell phone. That was how geeked out I was by seeing your own comic. It's one thing to have a comic that you did and you're selling at a convention, or a comic book that somebody buys at a comic store. But if it's actually in the spinner rack at the grocery store, and your dad can go and pick up a copy. Hey, go down to the grocery store. My comic's on the rack. I mean, that's really cool. I'm actually developing a web comic that's going to be up this year, mid-year, and I'd like to pencil more. I'd like to do more realistic rendering, sequential art. It's tough. It's tough to do, especially when you start out as an inker. It's like that blank page staring you in the face is intimidating, but hopefully it's will continue to challenge me. To be encouraging to someone, whether they're 12 starting, 12 years old, or 22 or 52. If they want to learn how to draw, they can do it. It's just like anything else. You practice and learn and try to get information from books and talking to people and getting tips and showing your work and getting a critique. It's all a process.
Another great Ithacon. This is 35, which is, I don't know, my first one was 7, so I've lost count after a while. But here I am again, just like a bad penny. I was contributing to fanzines in central Indiana. And the odd thing was, about half of us from the fanzines wound up working in the comics industry. I was offered in late in 1975 a chance to test for a proofreading position at Marvel. And I flew to New York and tested for the job, and did at least as well or as poorly as anyone else who was testing for it. And I was hired, and so I was on staff for a good 4 years, I would say. First as a proofreader, an assistant editor, and finally a full editor at Marvel. And along the way, I was writing freelance. And once I was a writer, I could live wherever I wanted to, which is how I wound up here. Most recently, I've been working on issues of Amazing Spider-Man for Steve Wacker, who's also around here somewhere. And the issues 627, 628, and 629, which will have all been on sale by the time this airs, unless you're airing it tonight. And I've written a short Mary Jane Watson story for a one-shot book out next month in May called The Many Loves of Spider-Man. And beyond that, I have a 4-issue miniseries I'm working on with Captain America and the Young Allies. It's set in 2 different time periods, 1943 and now. Nothing Has Stopped the Juggernaut was a 2-parter I wrote for Spider-Man decades ago, and when I was first working on this series. And it was one of those things, I was trying to come up with tougher and tougher adversaries for Spider-Man to fight. You know, we've seen him fight Dr. Octopus dozens of times. There's the Green Goblin, the Green Goblin was dead at the time, didn't want to bring him back. You know, all these various other villains who'd been used recently. So I'm trying to come up with new problems for Spider-Man to face. And one morning in the shower, I was thinking about going, Juggernaut, this big guy who's given all of the X-Men troubles at one point or another. That would be very difficult for Spider-Man to deal with. You know, here's basically an issue of Spider-Man trying to stay alive while trying to stop the Juggernaut. Good luck, because you know the catchphrase for Juggernaut was "Nothing can stop the Juggernaut." So that became the name of the story, and the whole thing revolved around first Spider-Man trying to deal with the Juggernaut, and then actually trying to stop him. And through a combination of pluck, fortunate circumstances, and dumb luck, he managed to survive and momentarily stop the Juggernaut. Fast forward to a year or so ago, Steve Wacker's after me to write some more Spider-Man stories, and he says, it's a title I came up with while shaving this morning. He says, you can use it or throw it away, whatever you want, but something can stop the Juggernaut. I'm going, okay, that's clever. I see where you're coming from. So I was mulling over ideas, and that title kept coming up in the back of my head. And I says, okay, something can stop the Juggernaut. What? And finally, I hit on a character who actually could stop the Juggernaut, at least for a while. And once I had that character, I had my story. It almost wrote itself. Advice for young writers: write as much as you can, in any format that you can, for whatever you can. As I said, I was writing radio commercials and promos, book and record reviews, short stories and essays, and I didn't really expect to work in comics. That just opened up, and it was great fun, and they paid me. What could be better? If you want to write, don't limit yourself in what you write. Write anything and everything, and what you want to write will come out eventually.
I have been a regular guest at Ithacon since number 9. When I was growing up, I got interested in comic books. I went to parochial school in the late 1950s, early 60s, and we used to get a comic book at the school called Treasure Chest. And one of the artists that worked for Treasure Chest was Joe Sinnott, who later went on to work for Marvel and inked Jack Kirby's work on the Fantastic Four. When I was growing up, I saw Joe Sinnott's artwork, and I loved it. I thought, this is beautiful stuff. I really liked his style, the way he drew people. It was just something that I made a decision early on that I wanted to draw comics. Since then, I started working on sports comic books, and one of them was Mickey Mantle. I worked with Joe Sinnott and John Tartaglione, and one of my greatest achievements to actually have my work on Brooks Robinson, my pencils inked by my hero Joe Sinnott, and it was a dream come true. When I was growing up, reading his work in Treasure Chest, I never would have dreamed that I was going to actually have my pencils inked by the master. And Joe and I are good friends. I saw him in November at an Albany convention, and he's 83 years old and still working. Okay, well, this book it's basically a Western romance historical novel. The Yellow Rose of Texas, more than just a song, this is the story about the history behind the song. There actually was a Yellow Rose of Texas. Her name was Emily Morgan, and she was an African American, came to Texas and got involved with the Texas battle for independence. The book features Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, Colonel Travis, Sam Houston. The male lead is Deep Smith, who was a scout for the Texas Army, and the story is about the how Emily became involved in the battle, and how she played a pivotal role in the Battle of San Jacinto, where Santa Anna's army was defeated by Sam Houston. And hopefully there are no more changes. Everything is all set to go to the printer, and it'll be out, the beginning of June.
It is going very well. This is my first year here in probably 15 years, but I came here probably 20 years ago when I was a kid, as a fan, Drove up here down here from Syracuse when I was probably 14 years old. Well, I can remember back when I was in kindergarten. That's when I remember drawing. And people told me I was good at drawing, which they probably tell all kids that, but I believed it. So I just said, all right, well, I'm going to draw. I mean, I didn't think I'd do it professionally because I didn't even know what that meant back then. But I don't know, when I was a teenager, I really fell in love with comics and drawing, and I thought, then that I'd like to do comics, draw comics for a living. Well, I mostly do storyboards, which I've been doing for the last 13 years. Right now I'm doing a new Scooby-Doo cartoon that comes out this July, and worked on Venture Brothers, a whole bunch of different shows. Now I'm doing, cheap plug, Iron Man children's books for Random House. I've just finished my second one, working on the third one now. So kind of doing two things at once, illustrating and storyboards at the same time. Well, you definitely have to love what you do because you do it so much. I mean, you gotta love it. But actually, the best advice I can give nowadays is get yourself out there. Get on Facebook, get on Twitter, even though I just jumped off of MySpace because there's nothing going on there, get on MySpace. Get a blog, they're free, and get your artwork out there and connect with other artists. Twitter's a great place. I post a sketch every day on Twitter, and people love it, and we give tips to each other, and hey, I like that, hey, I didn't like that one. And then you see other artists' work, and you just connect, and you never know where someone's going to see your artwork and say, hey, we should give that guy a shot, or something like that. So you just got to get yourself anywhere you can get yourself.
I'm loving it. It's been a ton of people. I like these smaller sort of regional cons where you get to really more one-on-one time with the fans and people have a real interest in this stuff. So it's been really cool. My first comic book was a Superman book, a big, thick Superman book called Superman from the 30s to the 70s. My dad had brought it back from Vietnam. It was his gift that he had for me, and I read that thing from cover to cover a million times. So I was a big Superman fan growing up, and got into Spider-Man also at a young age, like every kid does. And I've just collected comics to the point now I've got too many long boxes. I got kids of my own. I'm wondering what the heck am I going to do with all these things now that they're all collected into books and I don't need the actual comics anymore. But they're definitely a link between my adult life and my childhood life. Yeah, I started as an assistant for DC Comics. And at the time, I was like the oldest assistant editor ever. I had a whole other career before that. But what I learned over time is how much of the language of comics I just sort of had innately after reading 30,000 of them. I think that helped. I knew a lot of the history of comics at that point, so some of the talent I was dealing with, I sort of knew where they had come from. I knew a lot of their stories, which most assistants start a little bit younger than I was, and they don't always have that in their mind yet, or they haven't learned all that yet. So I was lucky in that regard. What happened was, towards the end of the election season, there was a interview in a British paper with both McCain and Obama. And somewhere in the interview, I forget how it came up. I haven't read it in a year and a half, but it came up that Obama was a Spider-Man fan. He read Spider-Man comics and Conan the Barbarian comics when he was a kid. So that was sort of in the back of our head. The election results happened. McCain, on the other hand, did not say he was a Spider-Man fan, and I wish he would have, or a Daredevil fan, or something. So that sort of got a little heat. It was in a couple magazines that like somebody drew Obama in a Spider-Man costume, and I think McCain in a Batman costume. It was a cool little drawing. And around towards the end of, right after the election, at some point after the election, it was in December, because it all happened very fast. I was actually on a plane. I had a relative who had passed away, and I was on a plane to a funeral. Someone had the idea, hey, we want to do a cover. I said, okay. I called Phil Jimenez from the airport, because Phil and I worked pretty closely together through the years, and Phil did it for me very fast. We came up with some sort of image, and it was just taking advantage of the fact that he had said he was a comic book fan, and we'd have it out around the time of the inauguration. And at a certain point, someone made the decision, hey, maybe we'll do a backup story where Peter Parker's at the inauguration, and it was just sort of a whim, just sort of the way that ideas catch fire. And then the news got out, and the cover got out on the slowest news day ever. Like nothing else happened. Thank God we didn't attack anybody, or no one attacked us, or nothing else happened that day, because it was picked up by every news service, and then suddenly the thing just blew up, and we had to do 5 or 6 printings of the thing. The guys who did the story, Zeb Wells and Todd Knock, they wrote and drew that thing. Zeb was feeding me a page of script at a time, like overnight. He'd give me a script, and I'd read it real quick, make sure it was okay. I'd pass it off to Todd, who was in California, and the whole thing from start to finish was like a week. And it was a great and lucky success that no one saw coming. It's hard to just state in an interview what we're looking for. We're looking for good art, and that style could be any number of styles. Marvel, in particular, is a company that publishes a wide range of books anymore, from photorealistic stuff to very animated, cartoon-looking stuff to very classic superhero-looking stuff. So we've got a wide palette. When I'm looking at it, I'm looking for some personal style. I'm looking for good storytelling. Storytelling's harder to find than a guy who can draw muscly people in costumes. Because there's some storytelling gene. I don't know how to teach it. I can point out when it doesn't work, but some people have it and some people don't. But for what we do, you either have to have that storytelling gene, or you've got to be able to create the single cover image that's, that immediately has a hit, that's immediately iconic, and that grabs the reader. I can't imagine a better time to be working in comic books because there's so many more outlets. Even as great as the Golden Age was, and there were definitely creativity-wise, that there's a reason that was called the Golden Age. But in terms of opportunity, people can create new characters now and not have to wait for DC or Marvel or Archie or someone to come knocking on the door. You can get that character online. You can get those stories. You have ways to get the story in people's hands now that you never had before. And I tell people all the time when they're trying to break in, if you're just knocking on Marvel or DC's door, that's like calling a professional baseball team and saying, hey, I want to play on your team. That's just not how, it's not the smartest way, and you don't need them to play baseball. You can go out and make your own comic and come to a show like this, and you'll walk away with, a dozen, 2 dozen, 100 people who've read your story. And editors will see it, and other people already working professionally will see it, and you own that piece. That's something that you have some control of, and I think that's what makes this the best time ever in comics.
Do we see ham? Why?
Let's see. Looking back ham.
Oh, I was looking for just the H. And honey mustard.
Mustard.
And lettuce and tomato and
Cucumbers.
This interview's better than Roger's, all right?
Yeah. One thing, he's almost coherent.
Roger was drunk when he did his.